Hey guys, welcome back. So, as always, just a huge thank you to you all, everyone who's tuned in, everyone who's liked and shared and subscribed. Um, really, just a huge, massive appreciation to all of you. Um, like I said, always leave a like, share, and a comment. I do read the comments and I will be getting back to you. You can also reach me on Instagram. So that being said, we're going to look into today's case. So I've decided to go on a little different route, and whilst what I'm talking about today it revolves around and comes back to the same person, a lot of these cases are still classified as cold case, even 50 or 60 years after they happened. So we are going to be looking into the crimes and the life of Derek Percy. So if you feel that you have any more information you want to add about this case, please comment down below. But with that being said, let's get into the life story of Derek Percy. So, Derek Ernest Percy, he was born on the 15th of September 1948 in Strathfield, New South Wales, Australia. Excuse me. He was the oldest of three boys born to Ernest and Elaine Percy, and Ernest worked as a railway electrician, and he eventually began working with the State Electricity Commission, and this was based in Victoria in New South Wales. And Derek's childhood was disrupted by many moves, um, with the family actually moving six times within the first 12 years of his life. First, moving to Chelsea, which is a suburb of Melbourne. That was in 1954. And then to Warrnambool and the southwest coast in 1957. Mount Beauty, which was northeast Victoria, in 1961. And Cancoban in New South Wales in 1965. So, throughout all this time, obviously, we can appreciate that moving that amount of times in your childhood, it can lead to a lot of disruption, a lot of unruliness. It definitely did. I'm someone who moved around quite a lot when I was younger, even more, well, obviously still in my adult life as well, and it definitely does affect you in the long run. Obviously, some of you may have moved around quite a lot, and it does disrupt everything. A rhythm that you get into when you're at school, and etc. And obviously, losing friend groups, having to make new friend groups. It's not easy for a child to compute, but obviously it doesn't excuse what he goes on to later do, but it's just my little input. So he began attracting the attention of the police and authorities in 1964. So he was around 16 years old at the time when he began stealing and wearing knickers and dresses, and he was mutilating dolls with knives and razor blades. And after the move to Cancoban in 1965, Derek began keeping a diary of bizarre and really violent sexual fantasies. 1966, he was told that he would have to repeat year 11, and he does that, and he goes on to try to complete his 12th year of education, or what we would call sixth form. But he really struggled with sixth form, and he ends up dropping out, and he actually instead goes on to join the Australian Navy. He begins working as an electrical mechanic. So you can kind of look at that as obviously the army, the navy, all that, very regimented, very disciplined in that kind of way. So that's probably the sort of thing that he was looking to get into. He wanted a bit more discipline and structure in his life. So he goes to join these sort of organisations just to obviously help balance out all these confusing feelings that he's got in his head. So he starts doing this in 1967, where his quiet nature, quiet and unassuming that he was described as, it earned him the nickname Ghost. He was first posted to an aircraft carrier, HMAS Melbourne, in March 1968. Troop ship HMAS Sydney in July of 1968, and HMAS Cerberus in 1969, April 1969. So, we then come to the summer of 1960. Well, it would be summer in the UK. In Australia, it would be winter. So, July 1969, whilst stationed at Mornington, Venezuela, Derek he drives to a place called Ski Beach. This is on the western point bay of Melbourne. And he noticed a couple of children playing nearby. So that was 12-year-old Yvonne Toohey and her 11-year-old friend Shane Spiller. So Derek was actually parked up, and when Shane and Yvonne were just walking past, Derek actually ends up confronting them. And he then grabs hold of Yvonne and told Shane to come with him. But Shane just basically refused, and on his person, Shane was carrying a tomahawk, and he ends up just basically threatening Derek with this tomahawk, and he tells Derek to leave him and Yvonne alone, and he threatens to hit Derek, but Derek just basically refuses to let Yvonne go, and Shane then begins to run in the other direction to try and get help. All the while, he could hear in the background Yvonne screaming, and she was begging for help, saying that he's going to hurt me, he's going to hurt me, he's going to cut my throat. And Shane ends up making it to the nearest police station, and he basically described what had happened and told them that the perpetrator was driving a orange Datsun, a station wagon, with a navy bumper sticker. So not the brightest tool in the box. If you are gonna be driving around in a car that is quite conspicuous in a way, you know, an orange car is really going to stand out. Maybe take off any sort of incriminating evidence, like something that's easily recognisable as a navy sticker. You know, you would think you would take that off, but not Derek. You know, he basically leaves this up for the world and his wife to see. So police end up taking Shane back to HMS Cerberus, where Shane actually pointed out the car absolutely immediately, and they quickly identified the owner as Derek, and they were then taken to Derek's room, and police actually found him trying to wash the blood off of his clothing, and police then had to actually speak to the naval commander to have Derek removed from the base and taken into the police station. And whilst being questioned, police noted that Derek was being really, really cooperative, but he just kept claiming that he had like really bad memory loss. But he eventually confessed after police just wore him down, kept wearing him down, kept him for a significant amount of time, asking him questions over and over again, and he actually ends up giving a full and frank confession. So he tells the police they could take him back to where Yvonne's body was. And Derek had actually taken Yvonne around 5 kilometres away to Fisheries Road in Devon Meadows, where he had dumped Yvonne's body behind some bushes. So Derek had actually tied her up and gagged her, and he then strangled her and repeatedly stabbed and cut her body. She was described as not completely dismembered, but brutally damaged. She was also found partially dressed, which we're going to come back to a little bit later. This does crop up in some other points in this story, so we are going to come back to that later. But obviously, it does tie in with what was found and what he had been writing, up to this point in diaries and notebooks about, if you remember, obviously not that long ago mentioned about violent sexual fantasies and all that. So obviously this whole thing sort of ties in with that. So the police then take Derek back to the station to be held while they search his belongings on Cerberus, and this is when they come across his diary. And this diary, it detailed all of the violent fantasies that Derek was harbouring up until this point. And there was talks about coprophilia. So, for those of you who are not aware, coprophilia is a sexual fetish for poo. Urophilia, so a sexual fetish for urine, and also talks about cannibalism. There's graphic drawings of dismembered women and children. So, despite his confession and leading police to Yvonne's body, Derek was actually found not guilty by reason of insanity in 1970 when this case did actually go to trial. So you guys know me, I do like to try and go into details with the trial. I couldn't actually find anything on the trial at the time, no matter where I looked, and so you're probably thinking, oh, the story's going quite fast paced, but the story ties in with some other stories that happened around the time, but Derek's name is one that keeps cropping up. So all the information I could find about him was all I could talk about, I'm afraid. So, like I said, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity in 1970, but he was remanded indefinitely in a hospital for the criminally insane, before eventually being relocated to a mainstream prison. And it was decided that he had committed the crime in a frenzy, and that knowing the horror of what he had actually done, he began shutting it out of his brain. And little fact, if he had actually been found guilty, he would have been one of the last prisoners in Australia to have capital punishment, by hanging. So obviously, capital punishment in Australia at the time, it was abolished in the 70s. So he, in the state of Victoria, he would have actually been one of the last in 1970 if he had been found guilty. So Derek reportedly settled really well into Ararat's Hospital, with one staff member commenting that Derek was a champion chess player, he was a stamp collector, he was a really good tennis player, and he actually managed to keep himself fit for the 11 years of being held at this place. He set up databases and allocated jobs. He kept himself to himself. He had no visitors. He was said to have been really highly intelligent, but apparently you would never be able to get a grasp on what he was actually feeling. He was also described as the resident Hannibal Lecter. So in 1998, Derek's case was brought to the Victoria Supreme Court after new rules have been put in place to review people serving indefinite terms. So it just basically means that obviously prisoners are given a jail term, but there's no fixed date of their release. So obviously they just have to be looked into to see if they are safe to go back into the community. Um, so there was a lot of speculation that he was going to be released in 1998. And the Victoria government considered sending lawyers to appear at the hearings to actually oppose Derek's release, and this was on the grounds of public safety. And Derek's case was heard by Supreme Court Judge Jeffrey Ernest. On the 30th of September 1998, Judge Ernest refused to set a minimum tariff for Derek, or actually give him a release date, despite Derek actually serving 28 years at this time. And this was basically the state normality for the criminally insane. And Judge Ernest said that Derek was never treated for his sadistic paedophilia. So we then jump forward a little bit further along to March 2004. So Derek applies to be transferred to Thomas Emblin Psychiatric Hospital, but this was turned down by the Justice Murray Kellum, who studied the case and said that he wasn't convinced that Derek still didn't have dangerous feelings about children or dangerous fantasies. And in June 2004, Derek began a one-on-one sex offender program while serving his time. He claimed that he was doing really well in this, but a leak to the Melbourne newspaper, the Herald Sun, stated that Derek hoped that participating in the program might give him the chance of parole. So the Adult Parole Board actually refused to recommend Derek's release, and psychiatrists said that he should not be moved to a less secure hospital or prison. Dr. Stevens, who was the Pentridge Prison coordinator of forensic psychiatry, wrote in 1984 that Derek was a highly dangerous and sadistic paedophile who should never be released from safe custody. He's not mad, but he's not certifiable. I do apologise. Sometimes I struggle with some certain words trying to get them out. Or psychiatrically treatable, and he is actually unsuitable to any institution. So other people who examined Derek came to similar conclusions, and a report on him said that if Derek was ever transferred, he will, in all probability, earn some kind of freedom for reasonable and conforming behaviour. The consequences could well prove tragic. So they're just pointing out that Derek would be able to manipulate his chances while in prison, because he obviously been described as highly intelligent. He would do everything he could. He would butter up, he would kiss ass to get what he wants. In what he wants at the end of the day was freedom. However, an unnamed police officer was more blunt, and he said that Derek was intelligent, cunning, and pure evil. There is absolutely no way that he is mad. In February 2005, Robert Doyle, who was the leader of the opposition, sought to make political capital out of Derek's case and stated that his party, if it was to come back into power at the time, that he would seek to make Hannibal Lecter laws to ensure that Derek and others like him would never ever be released, and added that there should not be any chance at all that he can get out, and we will introduce the lockup for special case prisoners who are beyond help or redemption. So, whilst this is all going on, the circumstances of Yvonne's murder was actually re-looked into, and this was after, obviously, like I said, the second round of appeals, and police began looking at some cold cases that were really infamous during the 1960s. So before and a little bit, I believe a little bit after Yvonne's murder. And they were never able to find the culprits of these. And sadly, obviously, no one was ever brought to justice. But like I said, police were looking at the paperwork and they were finding links and little clues and stuff that tied these cases sort of all together. The MOs were really, really similar. So police looked more into Derek's belongings, and these have been kept in storage for at this point up to 35 years. And these contained 35 boxes containing drawings, maps, and newspaper clippings, all related to the cases that we're going to be talking about in a minute. The defence psychiatrist Dr. Whitaker said that someone like Derek would have done more than write about it. I believe he has killed other children, but I fear Derek has also wiped all of this from his memory. In total, police suspected him of 6 cases dating back to January 1965. So, what I'm going to be talking about, it can be quite upsetting. Like I said, obviously, still to this day, these cases are still regarded as cold cases. They've never been solved. I'm hoping by a very small amount. I know, obviously, we're talking about crimes that happened almost 60 years ago. I appreciate that. But there could be something that does ring a bell with someone. So I'm really hoping if this video reaches out to someone in Australia, then please just come forward with any sort of information. Be really appreciated. But with that further said, obviously, like I said, it is going to be quite upsetting for some of you. But I feel it's just important to try and think about these people and think about if there's still any remaining family out there, they could still get some sort of answers to what has actually happened. So the first case we're going to talk about is the Wanda Beach case from January 1965, when the bodies of 15-year-old best friends Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were found on the 12th of January. This was the day after they reportedly disappeared. So Marianne had actually come to Australia from West Germany with her parents and 6 siblings in 1958. And her father, he had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, or what's more commonly known as Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he actually died from this, sadly, in 1964. So Christine lived next door to Marianne, and she lived with her grandparents by choice after her own father had actually died in 1953. And her mother then remarried and relocated to Sydney. So on Monday the 11th of January, the girls took Marianne's 4 younger siblings on a trip to Wanda Beach, and this was around 1 p.m. And the group just wandered around for about a little while. They stopped to have a picnic, and they ended up having another little walk after the picnic and wandered off for about 400 metres away from it. They left all their belongings at this particular little spot. And at this point, the wind sort of started picking up and that, and blowing sound everywhere. Even though obviously January time would be the summer in Australia, but obviously when you're by the sea, you get the sea air, and they end up taking a little bit of shelter from a couple of sand hills. And this was after some of the younger children were complaining about the weather conditions. So the 2 older girls then told them that they were going to go back and get the bags, and then return to this spot and take the children home. So 4 hours later, the girls hadn't returned at this point, and the kids then went back to find the bags, actually still in the same spot, but no sign or sight of the girls. So they end up taking the last train back home and arrive back at 8 p.m. And Marianne and Christine were then reported missing at 8:30 by Christine's grandmother. So the next day, on the 12th of January, Peter Smith, he was actually on a day trip himself with his three nephews, and they were walking across Wanda Beach, and he found what he first believed to be a mannequin laying face down in the sand. And it wasn't until he started brushing away some of the sand that he realised it was actually a body that he had found. So he then runs back to the surf club and he rings the police. So investigating officers, they arrive and they examine the area, and they find Marianne laying on her right side with her leg bent. She had her throat cut, and she had been stabbed up to 6 times. Christine lay next to her, face down, with her head laying against Marianne's left foot, and Christine's skull had actually been fractured from a blow to the back of her head, and she had been stabbed up to 14 times. Both girls had their underwear cut, and attempts had clearly been made to rape them. But semen was actually found on both the girls, but the autopsies showed that their hymens were still intact. So Marianne's younger brother, Wolfgang, he said that he had noticed a teenage boy hunting crabs, and also claimed to see this boy in the company of Marianne and Christine at one point. And then once again, a little bit later on, he was alone again. So sadly, by April 1966, the case actually went cold, despite the police actually making over 7,000 arrests. And the cases, this case and a couple of the others, they were actually reopened numerous times throughout the years. The last time was actually in 2014, when police revealed that the semen sample from Marianne and Christine had actually gone missing. And during these reopenings, 3 suspects were spoken to, and one of these was Derek. And he was actually known to be visiting family members at the time that this happened. This was in a nearby suburb called Ryde. And actual facial composites that were made at the time from other witnesses or people on the beach, they matched what Derek looked like at the time of his arrest for the murder of Yvonne. But sadly, due to the lack of evidence, police, they couldn't proceed with anything. So the second case is another cold case, one that still they've not really looked into any further, because there was just nothing that they could go off with this one. But the second was the Beaumont children in the Beaumont children case. So there was 3 siblings: 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 5-year-old Grant, who were playing on Glenelg Beach in Adelaide. This was on the 26th of January 1966. So witnesses said that they saw the children with a really tall, tanned, dark-haired man. He was estimated at the time to be in his 30s. But obviously, 58 years on, the children, they've never been found. Um, no one knows what's happened to these children. Um, and as of 2018, there is actually a $1 million reward for any information about the Beaumont case. Sadly, Nancy and Grant, who were the children's parents, they both sadly died fairly recently in Adelaide nursing homes, with Nancy dying in 2019, aged 92, and Grant only last year. He was 97 at the time. So sadly, both these parents have passed away, never ever knowing what has happened to their children. Obviously, I could only skim over this case because there is no other details other than that, other than the names and the dates that I can give you. So, unfortunately, yeah. So Derek, he was spoken to about the Beaumont children, and he admitted to being at Atlantic Beach on a family trip that particular day. But again, he basically denies any sort of involvement, any sort of knowledge about the Beaumont children's disappearance. The third was Alan Redstone, and he was a 6-year-old boy who was sent by his mother to go get ice cream for him and his younger brother. And this was on the 28th of September 1966 in Canberra. His body was found the next day in the suburb of Curtin, wrapped up in a carpet and left in a reed bed. So he had been bound and strangled. Witnesses reported seeing a young man with Alan on the day, and 2 other younger boys actually came forward to say that a man had attempted to murder them on the same day and in a very similar way. So the first boy said that he was tied up and actually thrown into a lake. He managed to free himself and swim to safety. He then comes back for his friend who had also been tied up, and both of the boys managed to escape. But no police report was filed at the time, and Derek admitted to visiting Canberra, but he denied any sort of involvement with the Alan Redstone case, and sadly the case again went cold, and as of 2024 it still sadly remains cold. Again, same with the Beaumont children, not a wonderful lot of information was released about Alan other than what I could discuss and find for you guys. The fourth was Simon Brooks, who was a 3-year-old boy, and he was found mutilated by a razor found at the site, and his throat had actually been cut with newspaper shoved into his mouth. Bear in mind, obviously, this is on a unspecified date that he was actually murdered. So it was determined that the cuts were made post-mortem and he had died from asphyxiation. And he was found laying face up, naked from the waist down on the 18th of May 1968. So it would have been around that time that he sadly lost his life in such a terrible manner, but I couldn't find a definite date. So by 7 a.m. That morning, Felice Lampasona actually went to that particular area to have a wee, and he notices some rotten tarpaulin covered in flies and whatnot. He pulls it back and sadly finds Alan's decomposing body. Simon, sorry. So police arrested over 1,000 people for this murder, but nothing actually went further than that. And Derek had actually been stationed nearby, Composites again matched his details, and when spoken to him in 2005 about Simon, he denied it, and the case again sadly went cold due to the lack of evidence. The fifth case was Linda Stillwell, a 7-year-old girl who went missing on the 10th of August 1968. This was actually only 2 weeks before her 8th birthday. So it's not been said what actually happened to Linda. Derek was actually on formal leave at the time, and he admitted to be driving in the same area in Sydney that Linda was last seen in. But further links weren't actually made to Derek until October 2014, and this was actually over a year and a half after he had died. So I can appreciate, obviously, there's not really much that they can do about that. Any other links than that, unfortunately, that one came way too late. So the sixth and final one was, I believe the girl's name was Linda Reed. I can only find one source that actually states his names. In other sources, she's just listed as unnamed 12-year-old girl. But I'm going to go by the name Linda Reed because that is the only name that I could actually find. So she was a 12-year-old girl, like I said, and she thankfully went on to survive. And she said that while she was cycling near Cerberus on the 1st of April 1969, when Derek actually attempted to abduct her, she came forward a little while after this, after seeing a picture of Derek in the newspaper after the murder of Yvonne, and so she come forward to basically state what had actually happened to her. Her father had reported the incident as well, but the naval police at the time, they basically denied any sort of record about this. So unfortunately there wasn't really much that they could do about it. The family, sorry, that they could do about it. So obviously Linda didn't actually come forward to talk about her experience until around 2004, when the stories about Derek's possible appeal going ahead. So she comes forward to talk about it, but like I said, obviously she's referred to as Linda in this report, but other sources say that she was unnamed. So I can only talk about that particular part, I'm afraid. So unfortunately, before Derek could be tried again for any more details on the crimes, he was admitted in hospital for lung cancer in 2013, and he'd actually at this point spent 44 years locked up, despite obviously, like we said, actually being found not guilty by reason of insanity. And the weekend before his death, he actually spoke out to the newspapers, and he went on to basically just deny any sort of involvement in any of these cases. And he eventually died on the 24th of July 2013 at 2 a.m. So that's all where the story ends with Derek, unfortunately. But I do want to take a moment just to talk about Shane, who, as you probably remember from the beginning of this story, he was the 11-year-old friend of the only victim that Derek actually went to trial for, Yvonne. So Shane, I found a little bit of information about Shane. Unfortunately, for Shane, it hasn't turned into a happy ending. So sadly, Shane actually never recovered for what actually happened to Yvonne. and it basically just affected him well into his adult life. Speaking out at the time, he said that I was promised he would never get out. I hope people never forget what he was like and what he done. They always thought he killed others, but they weren't able to prove it. So Shane lived in fear of Derek for the rest of his life and recalled at the time that he actually picked Derek out at an identity parade. And he said that Derek gave him a look of just pure evil. And Shane was scared that Derek would seek out and get revenge. In 2000, Shane applied for a crime compensation. He was awarded $5,000, but Shane actually ended up appealing this decision and he was re-awarded $50,000, which was actually the maximum that could be awarded at the time for any compensation. And Shane's neighbours all stated that he just remained fearful and reclusive. He at the time lived in Wyndham in New South Wales and never really moved out of the area. Sadly, I found two different dates for this part of the story. So one stated late August 2002, the other stated the 9th of September 2002. So we're just going to go by, late August, early September for this part. Shane actually vanished off the face of the earth. No one knows what happened to him. He's just basically been erased as if he never existed. Police went to his property and they found his car and his motorbike still in his garage on his driveway. And some people said that Shane's fear just basically got too much for him, and there's a possibility that he either fled to another town or even another country, or there was a possibility that he had committed suicide somewhere remote and his body has never been found. However, sadly, the police believe that Shane had been murdered for his compensation money. But like I said, as of 2024, there has been no sight, nothing of Shane. I am going to post up the last known picture of Shane somewhere in here. So again, obviously, if this story does reach an Australian audience and anyone recognises the person in the picture, if they have any information or anything like that, you can reach out, or obviously you can go through the correct channels, because it would be nice to know if Shane is still alive and well, or unfortunately he also become a victim in the long run of Derek Percy. I do apologise obviously if this video has seemed a little bit rushed. I can only talk about, like I said, certain aspects of cases that I can find. I've obviously always spoken about, since I've been doing this, that some of my resources are a little bit limited at the moment because I don't have a VPN. So some websites, if I'm looking into crimes from Australia or America, other places that are not in the UK, I can only talk about what I can actually access. There really wasn't a wonderful lot written about Derek that was out there, but I still felt that it was important to talk about his story today. In a way, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. Please leave a like, share and subscribe. Comment down below if there's anything that you can add to this story, and I will see you guys next week for another true crime story with me, Silhouette. Take care.